I'm Cathal Summers,
And I'm Deirdre Glynn,
your Teagasc Sustainability Advisors, and you're welcome to the Teagasc Environment Edge podcast, bringing you the latest information, science, and opinion to improve farm sustainability.
What has caused fertiliser prices to go through the roof? And with no way of knowing how long this will last, are there more efficient ways of utilising nutrients on the farm to grow our crops?
We also hear about a great project carried out by the Teagasc and 40 local farmers in the Kilkenny Waterford advisory region. How much do you think a tanker of slurry is worth?
With the new year just starting, it's time to think about fertiliser management for 2022. So with that in mind, we welcome back our friend to the show, Mark Plunkett, Teagasc Crop and Nutrient Specialist. Mark, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Deirdre.
Mark, fertiliser prices have gone through the roof at the back end of 2021. Roughly, what's the current price of a few of the more commonly used fertilisers on farms?
In the last 6 months, fertilisers have taken a big price increase that we have never seen before here in Ireland. If you take the likes of the straight nitrogens in terms of CAN, it's trading somewhere in the ballpark of 650 to 700 euros per tonne. Urea is also trading at high prices, again, somewhere between 950 and 1,000 euros per tonne. I suppose the interesting thing, Deirdre, is that the nitrogen has taken the biggest increase. It's gone about threefold compared to other years. In terms of blends, your typical blends, your 18-6-12s, your 10-10-20s, your 14-7-14s, your 13-6-20s, they're all trading somewhere in the ballpark of somewhere between 750 to 800 euros per tonne, depending on the blend. So most definitely, yes. P and K compounds have doubled in price, and nitrogen has tripled in price compared to, I suppose, the same time other years.
Mark, that's a savage jump. I remember about last December back in 2020, I think you were able to get special offers on CAN for about 185 a tonne. So that's a huge jump. What's causing that dramatic rise in price, or how long do you expect it might last?
In terms of the causes, Cathal, yes, there was very, I suppose, very good value there generally at the back end of any year. Up until this year, CAN would have been trading somewhere in the ballpark of 200 euros per tonne, but we've seen massive increases, and the main reason for the increase is very much down to natural gas, that it has increased 5-6-fold in the back end of 2021, and natural gas is the main raw ingredient when it comes to producing all types of nitrogen. There also has been, limited supply due to export bans of some of the major nutrients like DAP and also potassium, and there is issues around the whole area of freight and shipping at the minute. That it seems that product can be sourced, but it can be difficult to actually get it into the country. So there's a number of factors there that I suppose we've never seen before, driving fertilizer prices to all-time highs.
Because you'd hear people blaming Brexit, you'd hear people blaming the Suez Canal issues, but I know transport costs have risen hugely on shipping front. But is there other countries stockpiling, or is there a higher demand for the product, I wonder?
The demand globally seems to have increased, and also the likes of China, they have put an export ban. They are actually quite large producers of urea and the likes of DAP. So they've put export bans to maintain supplies, their own domestic supply, and also Russia has imposed export bans as well. So that has reduced the amount of fertilizer available globally, and has been one of the main, and again, another cause for the increase in prices that we currently see.
Mark, what advice can you give to farmers this spring in order to meet nitrogen grass crop requirements without breaking the bank?
That's a tricky question. There's a lot of, I suppose, avenues we could go down on that one. But look, I think for me, in terms of getting the most out of any type of nitrogen or any product that you apply in the springtime, whether it be slurry or bag fertilizer, I think it's very, very important when you decide to spread it that the conditions at time of application are correct for grass growth or plant growth. And what I mean by that, Deirdre, is that you've good soil temperatures. Soils are warming up; they're above 5 degrees and increasing. Soils are drying out, and also you have a good forecast. And I suppose the other important thing to remember as well is that maybe ask yourself, how much grass do you want to grow in the next 3 weeks, a month? And then that should give you an idea as regards how much nitrogen you should apply as either cattle slurry or bag fertilizer. Like there is a low demand in that early window. Like there is a demand, but it tends to be low, and it's generally supplied by the soil and then by either cattle slurry or bag nitrogen.
I suppose big thing there, Mark, as well is we're looking. You mentioned it yourself, how much grass you're going to grow, how much fertilizer is the requirement, and I always talk to farmers a lot about the grass grow curve and when grass starts to grow and when we get the most response. Can you tell me a bit about that?
Like grass is growing possibly nearly every day of the year, but at currently at low rates. But as we move into springtime, Cathal, as we move from say February to March, the grass growth picks up, and also as we move out of February and into March, also nitrogen efficiency increases as well. And as I say, it's probably there is a low demand in that early window. Like we're talking maybe 20-25 kilos of nitrogen, and that can be supplied by 20 to 25 cubic meters or 2 to 2,500 gallons of cattle slurry per acre, or maybe something like less than half a bag of protected urea, once conditions are suitable to kick grass growth off in the springtime.
Mark, slurry testing is going to be very important, I think, next year. Very, very important. Where can you what can you use in terms of equipment to do this? And what kind of nutrients should be available in, say, your watery slurry or your heavier slurry at some time of the year, at the beginning of the year?
Yes, Deirdre, that's a very good point, and I suppose it comes back to is that we now must look at slurry differently. Like slurry is the same as bag fertilizer, and when we buy bag fertilizer, we know what's in it, whether it's a straight nitrogen or an 18612. So most definitely, if you can get your slurry tested, it will be very, very useful to give you an idea how much NP and K is in it, and then we can adjust application rates. Maybe it's 1,500 gallons per acre, maybe it's 2,000 gallons per acre, or maybe it's 2,500 gallons per acre, depending on the quality of the slurry. In terms of how you test it or where you can get it tested, Deirdre, I suppose the simplest thing is a slurry hydrometer. You can buy them from it costs about €80. It's a simple device. You drop it into a container of slurry, and it will give you a dry matter reading, which is very much closely related to its NPK value. Alternatively, you can send a sample off to the lab and again get the major nutrients tested, the NPK or the dry matter, and again it'll tell you exactly what's in the slurry.
Yeah, and Teagasc have a couple of good videos up online as well on how to use the hydrometer for people who'd like to see its use. Yeah.
Just on the slurry, and it's going to be hugely important with the price of fertilizer going forward, Mark. And the Kilkenny Waterford region, the advisory region, carried out a project. I suppose it's last spring now. It's 2021, where we're at the time we're trying to come up with ideas how would we make our nitrogen our nutrients more efficient. So we decided that we'd get 40 farmers together, and we'd fund them to carry out slurry analysis on all their samples, like you just suggested, send them off to the lab. So well agitated slurry, send them off to the lab. And I know you're after having a good look at the results. Can you go through some of the results from that project? Or it was from dairy farms?
Yes, there was a very, very interesting project done there in the unit where they tested different slurries on dairy farms. They tested a standard slurry, and again it came back with an average of 6 units of nitrogen, 5 units of P, and 41 units of potassium. But I suppose there was a big range. Like the dry matter was 7%, but there was a big range in the dry matter from those samples. It went from approximately 3.5% to 10.5%, and also there was I suppose large variability in the nitrogen. The nitrogen went from 4 units to 10 units per 1,000 gallons. The phosphorus went from 4 to 9 units per 1,000 gallons, and the potash went from 17 to 67 units per 1,000 gallons. And I'd say the average there was a 6.541. Now it came out on average, I suppose, Cathal, fairly typical to our book value for cattle slurry. Like we generally work on a 6.532, but from that unit, the potash was about 25% higher with 41 units per 1,000 gallons. So it most definitely demonstrated the value of knowing what's in your slurry. And again, when managing that slurry, say come to springtime, you can adjust your application rate to deliver the amount of P and K that you want, especially on like your silage ground, and also then make adjustments for the nitrogen. The lads also looked at two other slurries. They looked at lagoon slurry, and again, the dry matter there, Cathal, was 3%, and its NPK was 3 units of nitrogen, 2 units of P, and 14 units of potassium. They also looked at dairy washings, and again, it also has an NPK value. The dry matter was 2%, the average dry matter, and again, it contained 2 units of nitrogen, 2 units of P, and 14 units of potassium per 1,000 gallons. So, like, most definitely getting your slurry tested is a good place to start to use that slurry more efficiently, especially in the times that we live in. Like with fertilizer prices at all-time highs, slurry now, we must use slurry as efficiently as possible to maximize or reduce our fertilizer bills in 2022.
And Mark, just looking at that, going back to the I suppose the heavier slurry, thicker slurry, 7% roughly, you're talking about 6 nitrogen, 5 units of phosphorus, and 41 of potassium. That's a decent compound for 1,000 gallons. If you were to put a monetary value on that 1,000 gallons, what roughly what would it be, Mark?
Monetary value, Carl, like if we take our typical slurry there, similar to that, like we're talking somewhere around, it's 40 euros plus per 1,000 gallons. That's what it's worth.
So you have a typical farmer going out now in spring, maybe in February or whenever, going out with 2,500. You're spreading up to €100 per load, really, going out, aren't you?
Yeah, if you take a 2,500 gallon tanker, like, you know what I mean, at 40 euros per 1,000 gallons, like it's worth about 120 euros, like, or that's its fertilizer replacement value that is worth. So, it's very important now, to use that slurry as efficiently as possible and put it on, ideally that should be going to the low fertility fields, the dry fields that have low P's and K's. That's where you're going to get the best response or the best use of especially the P and K in that slurry, and also keep a sufficient slurry for your silage crop as well, because your silage crop has the biggest demand for especially P and K compared to the grazing ground. So to reduce the impact of high fertilizer prices in 2022, using the slurry wisely around the farm will be key.
Yeah, and I think what some of the farmers down here in Waterford, Kilkenny region were most surprised at was, if we go back down to the dairy washings, you have 2 units of nitrogen, 2 of phosphorus, and 14 of potassium. And you'd hear a lot of farmers using products like 27, 2.5, 5, and when you compare the dairy washings, 2 units of phosphorus, and it's similar to 27, 2.5, 5 as regards to 2.5 units of phosphorus in that. There's a good old bang in dairy washings alone, like, isn't there?
Well, there is, like, if you take 2,500 gallons of dairy washings, like, there's 5 units of nitrogen, there's 5 units of phosphorus, and there's 28, there's about 35 units of potassium. So, like, if you take an intensely stocked dairy farm, like, 2,500 gallons of that dairy washings will supply, sufficient P and K on the grazing ground. It'll supply, maintenance for grazing. Like, we generally talk, somewhere around maybe 25, 30 units of potash on the grazing ground. So, there's a big savings there.
Mark, as advisors, we've been promoting, less technology. How important will less technology be in the application and utilization of nutrients?
Well, again, getting back to your original question, Deirdre, like, if you're looking for a tip in 2022, use low emission slurry spreading. You're going to increase the recovery of that nitrogen by 50%. So again, that 6 will turn into 9. If you take the average slurry there for the unit there, it'll be a 9,541. So you get more nitrogen. And I suppose the other big thing as well is that you get a very, precision application across the spread width of the band spreader or the trailing shoe.
So the message, right time, right place, right machine, and right rate are going to be paramount.
Yeah, look, I think the 4 R's, like whether it's using bag fertilizer or slurry, the 4 R's, very, very important. Say to get the most out of that slurry, or to use the especially the nitrogen as efficiently as possible, and the P and K that you implement the 4 R's, absolutely.
Yeah, look, the big thing now that we found, I suppose, looking at this slurry analysis, once you have that information, you can use it. But like, I don't know from talking to you before, Mark, you mentioned this year with prices so high that we're going to have to be really targeted in how we spend. And if we use our slurry correctly, we can forget index fours. We don't need to touch them with P, but we can look after the lowest, the ones and twos, as you suggested, the silage ground, and maybe even target some of our trees with that weaker type slurry, I suppose.
Yeah, that'd be a good strategy, Cathal. Absolutely, like that. Like again, the index fours, look, they're very fertile. You know, if you know that part of the farm should only be getting nitrogen, really. Like it shouldn't be getting any chemical or organic P's and K's. You know, we should be targeting it back onto the low index fields and the silage fields to get the best return from especially nutrients in the slurry.
So Mark, I know we discussed we have to be more efficient with our slurry going forward, but there is paddocks that we're going to have to get bagged nitrogen on. What's the best type of nitrogen to use?
Yes, Cathal, for that early window, you know, that first, second round, like urea is a safer form of nitrogen. It's more stable in those wet and cool conditions. And also, I suppose another plus to using urea in the early part of the season is that, you know, with the increase in nitrogen price, like, you know, the differential between the cost of a kilo of nitrogen between urea and CAN has grown. Like, for example, if you even take urea at 950 a ton, it's 207 a kilo, where if you take CAN, an equivalent price at 700 a ton, is 259 per kilo. So there's a 52-cent differential there between the cost of a kilo of CAN nitrogen and the cost of a kilo of urea nitrogen. So I suppose it's something to maybe be conscious of when you're buying your nitrogen, maybe over the coming days or weeks, that urea work out, you know, get the price for each and work out then the cost per kilo. And most definitely protected urea is a safer form of nitrogen, especially in that first, second round, that it's more stable. And also the research would show that we can recover more of that nitrogen to grow grass, which means that we can reduce our overall nitrogen requirement by about 10-12% in that first, second round.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point to make, because the difference between urea and protected urea is not massive per ton at the moment. At least you're guaranteed to hold on to that nitrogen, because as you've said before, it's not just those dry, windy days. It's also those cold, harsh days where the yard dries up really quick that you can have losses from normal urea, Mark, isn't it?
Yes, from the work that was done in Johnstown on protected urea, like they got the highest losses of volatilization in March. So again, you know, using protected urea will reduce that risk of nitrogen loss through volatilization.
No, that's brilliant. Like, utilize slurry, get your fertility and your line right, and that's great. Just to finish off with, a protected urea is cheaper than to spread, and it's better for the environment. So I think that's a good message all around. Look, Mark, certainly lots to think about, but now we really need to focus on improving our nutrient use efficiency across the farm in order to be sustainable, both financially and environmentally. But Mark, I think we'll have to get you on again because there's so much to talk about. But thanks a million for joining us today, and great advice as always.
That's no bother. Thanks, Cathal. Thanks, Deirdre.
That's it for this episode of the Teagasc Environment Edge podcast. Thanks to Mark Plunkett, Teagasc Crop and Nutrient Management Specialist, for joining us on the show.
Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the podcast. You can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify. And for more information, go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm Cathal Summers.
And I'm Deirdre Glynn.
Join us next time for the Teagasc Environment Edge podcast, signposts to farm sustainability.